Right on. Yeah, I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. I'd like to welcome everybody to Wednesday Night Big Book Study Workshop, a program of recovery laid out by the first 100 men and women. How we open this meeting, Serenity Prayer tonight. Give everybody a break. Hang on. Come on, Gail. What do we need for a good meeting? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Going solo tonight. Joanne's not here. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, we're on the fourth step. We had some homework last week. For those that are following along, we have the worksheets here. You can get caught up and get the basis of what steps 1, 2, and 3 is. You can kind of go through this and get caught up. We're going to keep going through, but the good idea is we keep going over the same information over and over again, because a lot of us are pretty, well, anyways, moving on. It takes a lot to really absorb this information. You ever notice that? It's a lot easier to absorb stuff that's not based on anything than actual fact-based sobriety, right? So we're going to cover some ideas tonight about steps 3 and step 4. So if you kind of go to page 63, we'll kind of get, I think the first 3 steps are all of them. If you haven't been through them, they're very confusing, right? A lot of people have attempted to go through the steps without using the manual, right? If you don't use the manual, then you're using other people's idea of what the steps are, or you're using the fellowships take on the steps, which are not necessarily the steps. Or if you've been through treatment, you've done their version of the steps, and you think you've done the steps. So there's a lot of thinking going on, right? And then when people share on it, they give you this idea that when they do step 3, that this remarkable thing happens, and that you don't need to do the rest of the steps, right? You had the ability to actually turn your will and life over, and they say, to God. Made a decision to turn our will and life over to God. You ever hear that? Mm-hmm. They missed the most important word, to the care of. So if you ask somebody to look after something for you, do you expect it back? If you went on holidays and you said, hey, Tony, can you look after my dog for me? And you came back from holidays and said, oh, no, I said to the care of. You said, asked me to look after it for you. I get it back. You ever hear people say, they give you the impression and then they say, oh, I take my will back. It's always yours. It's always yours. It'll never not be yours. It's always yours. What you do with it is the determination. So what happens is by the time we get to step 3, and they talked about here, we thought well before taking this step. Remember that was the question to look at the homework this week? Why would they ask you, we thought well before taking the step? Right? We thought well before taking the step, making sure we're ready, that we could at least abandon ourselves utterly to Him. Abandon. What does abandon mean? Why don't we break it down? Anybody ever hear of abandoned ship? When you're abandoning the ship, that means it's no longer feasible to stay there. To stay there would mean your demise. Does that kind of make sense? What you need is a new vessel to move you from the vessel that's sinking. We had 2 alternatives, an alcoholic death or spiritual help, right? Why do we need the spiritual path? So when you're thinking, we thought well before taking this, why do I need to take this step, and what's the purpose of the step? So if you don't understand why we need to take it or the purpose of taking it, then all that stuff that you hear in the fellowship makes sense, right? That, I've turned my will and my life over to the care of God, and it's all good now. I've done the surrender, I gave it to God, and me and God are good. So what I've just said is I don't need to do the rest of the steps in that much of a hurry. Anybody? Anybody ever do the surrender here and give their will to God and then drink again? Mm-hmm. But I didn't mean it that time. I mean it this time. Because we misunderstand what the step is actually saying. So they ask you to think well before taking the step, right? There's a pause there, isn't there? Like joining the Canadian military. They ask you, do you really want to do this? Do you know what you're signing up for? And they ask you to think about it. You're volunteering to join the military. You're not getting drafted. You're volunteering. I went through the process. I sat there. They said, before you sign this, think about what you're doing in the commitment that you'll be involved in over the next 4 years or 3 years at that time. Then you recommit. It's a 3-year commitment. I signed the paper. I made a decision. I thought well before taking it. I signed the paper. What was I signing the paper to do? To fulfill my commitment, right? Now, if I made that decision by showing up at the recruiting office, does that mean I fulfilled my commitment? Have I started my commitment? I need to sign the paper to commit to it. And that's what they're kind of saying here. So we've looked at step one, and what does step one say we're afflicted with? By the time you get here, you're being convinced you're at step three. So by the time you get here, you're convinced that you're conflicted with an illness or a behavioral problem. An illness. What's been determining your story? You or your illness? Your illness. So as long as your illness is present, right, that's what's making your decisions for you. Even though you may not know it, that's why you're in conflict with yourself all the time. Anybody been in conflict with themselves here? I can't believe I'm doing this. I can't believe this is happening. What the hell is happening with my life? Look at it. Blah, blah, zzz. Anybody have that kind of brain? And then you make other decisions that you're okay with. You've thought about it, you made a decision, whether it turned out good or bad, you're okay with the decision because you know you've made it. And then when you're doing things that you don't want to do, and you're still doing them, that creates conflict. And now if you're not being able to do stuff that you want to do, that creates conflict, which is unmanageability. Wouldn't you say so? Anybody been in conflict here? And what's the ultimate act of unmanageability? Drinking. You're doing an act against yourself. So by this stage of the game, can you stop yourself from drinking at certain times? No. So what's the only solution that they offer? So that's step one. Step one says I'm prone to repeat the same thing over and over if I'm afflicted with, what's that word again? Alcoholism. If I'm afflicted with alcoholism, that means when I take a drink, what happens? Phenomenon of craving happens. And now that I'm sober and I never want to drink again, too bad, right? Because there's something else at work that I can't see, feel, and touch. It's called a phantom. And some people, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, 8 years, 15 years, there comes a time when they're without defense against the first drink. Where do we get that idea from? More about alcoholism than the doctor's opinion, right? How many people are here right now? One person. What? I'm starting to get that deer in the headlight look, right? It's a lot of it. So step one determines that we have an illness. Step two is the solution to that illness. Does anything change as a result of knowing those two things? Are we able to keep ourselves sober based on that information? So knowing the solution, is that the solution? Right? So they're saying here, now I'm making a decision to do what? Well, we thought well before taking this. So now I know the only thing that's going to save me from me, so I have a different story, is the first thing that has to be eliminated from my life is alcoholism. I have to recover from that state. Right? Because if that doesn't happen, it doesn't matter what I do. It's just a matter of time before I drink again. But I can't recreate my life because most of the time I'm in conflict with me and the world around me. Anybody in conflict with? How many people spend a lot of time arguing with themselves about stuff that's not even happening, that might happen, you're prepared for it to happen, and just in case it happens? Anybody ready? Yeah, anybody have three-sided arguments with the person you're with and the witness of the argument? Anybody judge and jury, prosecutor and lawyer? An arresting officer. So see, and we spend all day like that. Anybody spend a lot of time in conflict and negotiations with self and people that are not there? So they talk about that on page 62. The inability to shake self with self. Because why can't I create the life that I'm looking for any given period of time? What's my problem? Lack of power, right? I cannot create the shift for any given period of time necessary to bring about the happiness, joy, and peace that I'm looking for. And if I can't find that, what will return? The insanity of the first drink. Some of us, we're really masochists. Some of us, we can endure a lot of pain. We're not people that, right? We're very strong-willed people. Any strong-willed people here? Huh? Oh, yeah, I can take a beating. Even though it's administered by me, I can. Anybody? Okay, so then we get here. It says, we thought well before taking the step. What are we thinking about here? That we could at least abandon ourselves. Why would they be saying that? To what? Abandon ourselves to what at this stage of the game? Why are we making a decision and thinking? What's the purpose of it? Well, it's your decision. Why do you need to do the rest of the steps? Well, to create this psychic change or spiritual experience. If you don't have this psychic change or spiritual experience, what's your fate? What's the promise? You're going to drink again, right? And for some of us, to drink is to die, to burn our lives to the ground. How many people could afford another relapse here? So what's the only thing that's going to save you from it? Because at this stage of the game, this is being convinced, we're at step 3, at this stage of the game, we've tried everything to try not to do the things that we're doing and try not to do the things that we are doing. Anybody? We've tried everything. And invariably, we've relapsed or they drop you off at AA because everybody around us have tried everything. Anybody get to a point where they just stop talking to you about what the things you're doing? You've tried everything. It's just like, what's the matter with you? Anybody had that asked? How many people are proud owners of one of those statements? What's the matter with you? Why are you doing this to yourself for? Yeah. And have you asked yourself that question? Why are you doing this? How many people ask themselves that question? Why am I doing this? Like, what's the matter with you? Have you asked you what's the matter with you? Yeah. And what did you say? I don't know. But there's something. I don't know what it is. There's something, right? And so we come here looking for an answer to something that we don't know, right? Like, hey, there's 2 of us here looking for an answer. Who? Me and this other person's asking me what's the matter with me. I didn't want to know what's the matter. And then we find out what's the matter with us is that we're afflicted with alcoholism. It makes good sense now, right? That AA is designed for relapsers. It's not designed for people who can stay sober. Because if you could stay sober, would you come to AA? No. Unless you're here for the dating. Then you get everything you deserve, everything you get, right? There was a time there, it was in the paper, AA, great place to meet single, sober people. Then they'd bring them back, you keep them. No, sir. Squirrel. Okay, so here they talk about, they give us a summary of this, they give us an idea of this on page 54. Right? And we're going to get into this. And they talk about these underlying things that determine our life, right? And halfway through the page, they kind of talking about our belief system, that we actually have one without realizing it, and where we spend our energy and worship and all these other ideas. And the faith here is that the concentration of things hoped for or the things that will make our life better. Is that not a form of worship and belief? I believe that when these things happen, right, and we dream and we're about having things, when I have these things, I'm going to be happy and my life's different. Anybody? So that's a form of belief system, where you spend your energy and your ideas. Yes, no? Yeah. And they talk about that here. They talk down here. Were not these things the tissue out of which our lives were constructed? Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? So all your thoughts, your ideas, your beliefs, and where you spend your energy determines what your life looks like. So if you're problem-oriented, and you're thinking about problems all day, and you're looking for solutions to problems that are not even happening, is your life going to be problematic? Yeah. Are you going to be in a constant state of tension and fear and anxiety? Because we're problematic, because we're more instinct-based than we are, later on we'll find out, spiritually based. We're very self-reliant to believe that when I have these things, I'll be okay. And we've pursued these things. How many people has pursued the road of happiness through people, places, and things? With the idea, when I have these things, I believe we spend all that energy there trying to achieve it. Anybody? We get it, and it's kind of like, oh, man, is this it? Like, I remember I was 17, I got into Union, youngest guy to get in Douglas Aircraft Union, It was a big production to go back to the family reunion and let them know I had arrived. Anybody had that feeling before the year? Because that's where you do the show and shine, right? Walked in, Douglas Aircraft. Look how great I am. You know, from the black sheep to the da-da-da-da, here I am. And I started drinking. By the end of the night, I came to in the kitchen, hanging onto a 40-ouncer, talking to my uncle. I was crying. I said, is this what a man's all about? I'm crying. Coming out of a black... And he's looking at me like I blew a head gasket. And that's all I remember. The next thing I know, they're saying I was hitting on my cousin. So it was a rotten night. It was a terrible night. I'm glad I don't remember anything, right? I can no longer confirm or deny. And if you're going to accuse me of something when I was drinking, talk to my drunk self, not my sober self. I seen that today. That was funny as hell. Anyhow, that's one night. Now you start piling those nights together and you get sober and you're trying to recreate your life. You got a lot of garbage to work through. Anybody got a lot of garbage to work through? How are you going to make sound, sane decisions when your whole life's determining what you do today? Because it's not today determining what you do today. If you're untreated alcoholic, you got not only alcoholism that's driving you, you got all the ghosts of Christmas past driving your bus. Anybody remember that show? The guy knocks on the door. There's 3 of them. We got a whole busload of them. That's what they're saying here. These things that we concentrate on, believe, and re-harbor, re-feel, revisit are making our decisions for us. Anybody go to get into a situation before you even get into it, you know the outcome of it and you just don't bother? How many people talk themselves out of happiness here? How many people told people where to go before you even met them? I've sat there, looked this beautiful young. I think, wow, she looks great. I'd like to meet her. Then you think about the first date. Then you think about the marriage. Then you think about the kids. Then you think about the lawyer. And then you think about losing everything. And she smiles at you and says, yeah, right. Come on. Anybody have that kind of thinking? Okay. So, okay. I'm not alone, right? So, a lot of things driving the bus, right? I'm not even driving the bus. I'm hanging onto the bumper screaming for dear life. Okay. So they say if we're going to reconstruct our lives, we need to get this power. And we need to know where the power source is. This is like if I was sitting here and we didn't speak the same language and I had a cassette there and I was hanging on to a power source and I was going like this, everybody would point me to an outlet, right? That's what they mean. God is we understand him. We all have the same understanding of this power that we need to get access to that recreates our lives. In order for this thing to work, I need to plug it into the wall, right? And if the outlet's working, then I got power to operate, and we'd all know how to fundamentally operate. If I held up my cell phone, everybody would know what a cell phone is, right? It's universal language. And if I kind of went like this, everybody would know I'm looking for a power cord for it, right? Everybody generally knows how to use a phone. Yes or no? So it's as we understand it, right? There may be a little bit. Mine's a Samsung. Mine's an iPhone. It doesn't matter what kind it is. It's secondary. The basis of it is all the same. So when they say God as we understand him, this is how the first understanding of it is it's a power that we need to get access to. That's the first fundamental idea that they're putting across to us. The second idea here is on page 55 is where this power originates from. And on page 55, they're saying, hey, this is the start to this thing that we need to acquire to create this change that they talked about in 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. So that means as a result of this course of action, what was discussed in step 2 is now been achieved through this course of action. That was the purpose of doing this course of action as discussed in step 2, which was the solution to what step? Step 1, right? So they talk about here, actually, we're fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity. What's calamity? Noise. Where's the noise? In your head. Right? You have your own riot everywhere you go. By pomp, by worship of other things. Anybody need worship explained? We spend a lot of time worshiping things on the belief it'll make us happy. Anybody? When I get this or get rid of this, anybody got the God? As soon as recovery, As soon as I have all these things, I'll be happy. Well, did you have them before? Yes. What did you do? I celebrated with a drink. So anyways. But some form or another, it was there for faith in a power greater than ourselves, and a miraculous demonstration of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as a feeling we had for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within. In the last analysis, it was only there he may be found. It was so with us. So where's this last place that this thing can be found? Where's the last place we look? Within. Anybody ever told to make an idea of what God is to you? Your own understanding of God? How many people have been told to make that list? How many people put on the list, it's something that I'm able to get access to deep down within? And that list is all things that make me feel better. Love, kindness. It's a gimme list. It's not a result list. Peace, happiness, contentment, psychic change. So it's a totally shift in ideas here. All the promises are internal shifts. You ever notice that? They're not the car. They're not the house. They're not the... It's a totally different way of looking at things. And the shift that they talk about is house or no house, job or no job, kids or no kids, wife or no wife. Whether she comes back or whether she leaves, I'm able to find contentment and happiness in my life because my resources are now within instead of my happiness is not outside of me. Big difference, right? Most of our happiness is all situational. Most of our depression is all stuff based outside of ourselves. How many people would say that's true? Right? So they're saying here, if we can get this access that they all got access to, then we can experience the same change they had. But until they got this access to this power, there was no real change. There was the pursuit of happiness through people, places, and things. I call it evangelical sobriety. I'm looking for the right? In sobriety, right? And then we say, I'm sober because, look, God's shining on me today. Everything's great. Oh, I took my will back. Things aren't great. So see that ping pong thing? They don't understand the terminology between taking your will back. No, you didn't exercise your will in step 11 as suggested. You chose to go your own way. But if you don't have any other way to go, then you have no other choice, do you, but to continue to look at your external circumstances as whether you're with God or not. Not your internal circumstances. Big difference in shifts and ideas, right? So when we get back to this page of 63, they talk about here, and everybody got a pen and paper? You're going to need it here. We're going to have fun today, I tell you. Okay, I'm going to have fun. I don't know about it. Okay, so page 62. Actually, if you back up to page 60, how it works is a summary of step 1, 2, and the course of action they took and the results of it. It's a summary of the course. That's why it's in chapter 5, right? You understand step 1 now. You understand step 2. The first half of how it works talks about if you don't have this change, you continue to relapse. Remember, we deal with alcohol. Cunning, baffling, and powerful. What are they asking you to remember? What are they asking you to remember? Remember, you deal with alcohol. That's what they say. Remember, cunning, baffling, and powerful. So how would I look for the cunning and baffling part? I can't because it's cunning. Remember, you're dealing with something you can't remember. Remember? That's what it's saying. Hey, because when it happens, you're the last one to know it's happening. That's why it's an illness. Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind, it might be good to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk and find a methamphetamine dealer. It's kind of like, it's crazy. As observers, we think, are you nuts? But when you look at your own experience with your relapses, or people having to drop you off at AA because you can't get sober, there's something fundamentally wrong beyond your comprehension. Is it not? And you're the last one to be concerned about you. You ever notice that? Yeah. Everybody around you is concerned about you. You not so much. No. Okay, so, and then they talk about this process they went through on page 59. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. When they talk about the steps, they're talking in past tense as something already done. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol. As a new person going through this, you're admitting you are powerless over alcohol. You don't have a solution to your dilemma yet. They do. That's why they're talking in past tense. All this conversation here is what they did that we have yet to do. They talked about that process. And then on the next page, I always like how it turns the page, is like the shifting, right? Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. It's not about the steps. People look at me really weird. Everybody talks about the steps. It's not about the steps. It's about the experience obtained through the steps. It's about the relationship. Does that kind of make sense? Because unless I have this change, I could do all the steps in the world, but if it doesn't produce this change, then it doesn't matter. Because inevitably, what's going to happen? I'm going to drink or kill myself or kill somebody else. Anybody? Okay, then they talk about here is the change that acquired as the result of this course of action and what it looks like. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. When you get to step 10, it talks about we've entered the world of the spirit. Our next function is to grow in understandingness and effectiveness of what? My relationship. They give me the guidelines on how to do that. Does that kind of make sense? And it says being convinced we're at step 3. Right on page 60, being convinced we're at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and life over the care of God over to God as we understood him. What do we mean by that and just what do we do? Now they're going to explain what they mean by that and how to do it. Does that kind of make sense? So then we go through on page 60, 63, 62, 63. They talk about the human condition and they talk about the alcoholics as an extreme example of self-will run riot. Though he usually doesn't think so. Because we're used to the condition that we've created. When you live beside the railroad tracks and you got the airport, Toronto International Airport on one side of you, and you got CN railway lines on the other side of you, at first it takes a little while to get used to, and after a while you don't even notice it's happening anymore. The China's all shaking, everything is kind of like, just like our minds. We're used to the noise it's created, and it becomes our natural habitat. Anybody else visiting that is going, holy smokes, man, how long you been living like this? And we go, what? The alcoholic life seems the only normal one. We're used to the chaos because we've conditioned ourselves to live in it. So when they say you'll comprehend the word serenity and new people, I don't know what they're talking about because I haven't experienced what they're talking about yet. You need to get there. When you get there, like Bill did, he was alarmed, right, by this thing that happened that he phoned his friend. So when you experience it, then no further explanation is necessary, right? So they talk about this thing. Selfish 62, selfish self-centeredness that we think is the root of our trouble. What's a root? Buried below the surface. You can't see it. All you can see is the effects of it, or feel the effects of it. It's something deep down within. So they talk about driven by 100 forms of fear and self-delusion. Who's the only one that don't know they're in that when they're in that? So how would you be able to formulate any kind of reasonable idea when you're in that state of mind? Everything that makes sense to you wouldn't make sense to other people unless they were like you. That's why newcomers like talking to newcomers. You bring that stuff to an old timer, they go, what are you talking about? That sounds crazy. And then you stop talking to them because you get offended. Right? So they talk about, okay, selfish, self-seeking. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation. Anybody have that list of people? I was just standing there minding my own business. Look what they did to me. Can't believe they treat me this way after all I've done for them. Yes, after everything you've done for them. Yes. Okay. But invariably, we find that sometime in the past we've made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. They're talking from their experience. I don't know what they're talking about yet. How many people has been through these pages before? How many people thought about somebody else they referred to? When I read these pages, before I went through the I thought it referred to my girlfriend. I was reading, I said, I'm going to go home and put this on the night table. She's so like this. Come on, how many people thought somebody else that this referred to? Anybody? How many people read it and said, oh my God, that's me? No. I've thought of other people that referred to. How many people thought of somebody else that referred to this? Right? There's that inability to see. So these people went through the fourth. They see where it originates from inside themselves, these things, that fabric of their tissue that drives them, that created all the havoc that they're experiencing, right? So they talk about here. So our troubles we think of are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, the root, out of ourselves. And the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run right, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness, we must, or it kills us. That's strong language, kills us, right? God makes that possible, and there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. So that means the inability to shift my focus from me. What's the root of our trouble? Ourselves. What's our favorite topic? Selves. What's our first obsession? Ourselves. What are we always thinking about? Ourselves. And when we're thinking about somebody else in regards to how they're not treating ourselves. And when we think how we can help them is more how we can help ourselves. Right? Anybody? Yep. Yeah, that's why I stopped. Moving on. Okay. Well, come on. How many people think when they're going to go help somebody, what they'll get out of it? Anybody? Recognition? Anyway, so let's move back over to 63. They just talked about their experience on the top of 63. And they talk about as we felt new power flow in. You see that? As we enjoyed peace of mind. So as they got access to this power, where does it stem from, this power? Where does this power stem from? Where's the access to this power that they're talking about? Deep within. Deep within, and they confirm that. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, we were reborn. As we became conscious of his presence, we've moved the experience from an idea into an experience. It's moved from our thinking into our consciousness. We've got access to this power that redetermines our lives, right? That's what the promises are based on. They talk about here, conscious of his presence. We begin to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, and hereafter. We're reborn. That's a total shift from the previous page, right? Total shift. Their primary focus isn't themselves. And it's natural to be that way until you've had this change. When you have this change, then you get into second phase recovery. What's first stage recovery? The over-concentration of self. I'm the primary focus of my life. And how life and everybody and everything is in direct relationship to me. That's self-centered. Right? When you're in a meeting, people are talking, you're thinking. That's self-centered. You believe what you have to say to you is more important than what the person's saying. We're all like that. That's the human condition. We're extreme examples of it, right? So then they talk about here, we were now at step 3. We're going to show you how to achieve what we've just talked about, right? So this is kind of like saying, we thought well before taking this. So do you want your story to look like page 62 or page 63? Right? And the shift at the bottom is they got access to this power. They went through this archway where they're able to recreate their lives based on different principles and ideas. Right? They got access to this power that recreated their whole life. If you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, then you're ready to take, what's that? Certain steps to create this change, because we can't create this change. They said, have you tried everything to create this change and to recreate your life and to rebuild it different than what it's looking? And what has been the sum result of everything that you've tried? What do you mean you're depressed? Anybody? How many people experience depression here on a constant basis? What's a key ingredient to depression? Huh? Thinking. You notice it's really hard to be mobile and depressed? You ever notice that? It takes a lot of energy. Don't tell anybody it don't take a lot of self-will to be depressed. You got to put a lot into it. You got to make sure you're not in contact with anybody happy. That's one thing. You got to stay away from meetings. That's another thing. That'll really disturb you. And you got to stay at home on the couch where you're not mobile. That helps. Anybody notice that? It really helps. And if you really want to enjoy your depression, you got to kind of lie down. Anybody? Come on, how many? You got to lie. And then you see the phone ring, but you don't answer it. How many people watch the phone ring and you don't answer it? That's a lot of dedication, but there's also something else happening there, is lack of power to create a shift sufficient enough. So when they talk about here, ready? We say we're now at step 3, page 63. I thought that was kind of funny. The two biggest steps, 6 and 3. Okay, so page 63. We're now at step 3. Many of us said to our makers, we understood him. God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self. Anybody have problems with bondages of self here? Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do, what's that? Thy will. Take away my, that have victory over them. May I bear witness to those that help with thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always, without will before taking the step. Are we capable of achieving that in step 3? Step 3 is a summary of the whole course of action. When I finish 12, I've completed the circle. I'm able to achieve what happens in 3. So 3 is like the engagement, right? Still anything could happen. It's not really a commitment yet, but you're into it. You're kind of like, I see the benefit of dating, right? Wow, man, this is something I've always looked for that I need to have in my life. So you get a little more serious. And then you ask for the engagement, but you're not married yet and anything could change, right? And then you go through the process. When you get to 9, 10, 11, and 12, it's the marriage. And we need to get, most of us get to the engagement part. Seems too serious and we want to go back to dating. It's okay. It's like plenty of fish recovery. I don't know what that's kind of like. Sorry. So then we start through this thing. So then they talk about here, which is really interesting if you're following. So we kind of agree the reason I'm making this decision is to do the rest of the steps. The purpose of the rest of the step is to accomplish this experience, what they're talking about in 3. I haven't achieved it yet, but I want to achieve what they're talking about. Here's a summary of what we're hoping to obtain. What are we hoping to obtain through this course of action? Well, the ability to be relieved of the bondage of self. How many people would like that, other than using a drink or a pill or some other form of whatever, right? And we have a list of things that we use to create a shift in our psyche that relieve bondage or difficulties of self that only creates more problems. Anybody have that list? Okay. That I may better do thy will. Do I know what that is at this stage in the game? What's God's will for me at this stage of the game? Better do thy will. Well, what's God's will for me at this stage of the game? If I'm doing step 3, I should know what that is, right? Rest of the action, we've said over and over. Step 3 is making a decision to do the rest of the work. Because if I was able to achieve these things in step 3, would I need to do the rest of the work? If you paid me for a full week work today, would I need to come in for the rest of the week? No. Sorry. One guy's honest here. The rest of it, okay. Okay, kind of like that. Take away my difficulties. Do I know what those are? But wouldn't you like that to be happening? You know, the struggles that you have on a daily basis that you try to create a shift. Wouldn't you like that to be taken away? You'll know new freedom and new happiness? Not okay. Victory over them, may I bear witness to those that would help with thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. They talk about here. Let's go here. That we thought well before taking the step, right? That we were ready to at least abandon ourselves utterly to him. We found this very desirable to take this step, spiritual step, with an understanding person such as our wife, best friend, spiritual advisor, but it was better to meet God alone than with someone that might misunderstand. The wording of course, was quite optional, so long as we expressed the idea. The idea is, I need to get this experience. It's an idea that, you know what, I'd like to go on this trip. Man, my life is it's been cold here, but I'd like to go to the Bahamas. I've been at a travel agent. We've talked. Everything's in place. I just need to put the card in to pay for it. And then make the arrangements to go on the rest of the trip, that when I get there, I'll be sitting on the beach, I'll be able to enjoy it. Am I on the beach because I made the decision to go there? No. So I need to go through the rest of the actions that get me to the place that I'm making a decision to get to. That's what step 3 is. I'm going to follow the rest of the course of action to get to this place that I need to experience for myself, that all these people that went before me experienced. That's why they put these travel brochures together. That's why they make it look really good. Man, I'd like to have that in my life. That's what the promises are. That's what the people that went before us is. Yeah, we used to be like you. We went through this course of action, and this is what we're experiencing now. And I go, man, you used to sound like you used to be like me, but you're not looking like you're living like I'm still living. Because my life was what I used to be like, what it was still like, and what continued to be like. And you seem to be happy, joyous, and free, and being able to make easy going of life and useful, happy, and contented. How did you get there? Well, this is the course of action to do so, right? So then then they talk about what confirms that decision. Talks about at the bottom here. Next, we lunged out on a vigorous course of action. What does vigorous mean?
Go for it.
Get busy. What does it mean to us? Well, you know, Seinfeld's on tonight. Maybe I'll get to it tomorrow. There's always something more important than participating in my own, life, right? Okay, the first step of which is a personal house cleaning. Why do they call it a first step here? What's the first step in bringing about recovery now? What's the first step in bringing about this solution? Step 4. Step 4 is the first step in bringing about recovery. Bringing it about. Step 1 is the first step in recovery because you have to understand what the problem is. Then you have to understand what the solution is. And then you need to make the decision. Do you want to go on to the bitter end, or do you want a solution to your problem? I want a solution to my problem. Okay, the first step in bringing that about is step 4. How many people brought their car to a mechanic here because there's a problem with it? What's the first thing a mechanic will do? Based on the symptoms, they'll assess the problem with your car. Does it change anything? So you're sitting in the parking lot at Canadian Tire now you've confirmed that there's a problem with your car. Unless it's fixed, it's going to be totally hooped. It may go on a little longer, but it's on the verge of being totally hooped. What does that change? See if you surrender to it. See if you accept it. See if you turn it over. See if you ignore it. Doesn't matter. The problem stays the same. Whether you accept it, ignore it, or don't deal with it, it doesn't change nothing. But by understanding it, then you could look at the solution going, hey, what's the solution to this thing? He'll give you a list of things that need to take place to fix this problem. He says, as the result of this course of action, you have blown head gaskets, you need a new head gasket. But in order to get you a new head gasket, we need to go through this procedure to do that. Now you got a list, you're sitting in your car, which is step 2. As the result of the course of action that he's kind of offering, you'll have the change that you need to fix the problem in step 1. So you're sitting there in the car, going over the list, you memorized it. Has it changed anything? So now you know there's a solution to this problem. Now he's going to ask you to make a decision and turn over your keys. Well, first the keys. But you got to assess whether you need this done or not, right? So you hand over the keys to him, and then you go back, sit in the car, and you do the 3rd step prayer. Has anything changed? But now he's got your keys. You made a decision to turn your wheels and your engine over to the care of Canadian Tire. It may sound kind of weird, but you feel better about the idea that it's going to get fixed. But is it fixed? Has anything changed? You could recite the 1, 2, 3 step. Yeah, he's got the car. Yeah, he's got the car. Yeah, he's got the car. But you're still sitting in the parking lot. What confirms that the change is going to start happening? when he takes the car, puts it in one of those booths, lifts the hood, and as soon as he lifts the hood and put a wrench to it, he begins the process. Until that happens, nothing changes. And he has to go through the whole process in order to complete what was discussed in step 2. Does that make sense? So now when you hear all this stuff about step 1, step 2, and step 3, they really don't know what they're talking about when they talk like that. So what's the principle then of step 1, 2, and 3? Because step 1 now is we tell you what the problem is, we tell you what the solution is, and the spiritual course of action to fix this. So the principle of step 1 is, what's the problem? I need to assess what the problem is in anything before I can apply a solution to it. The second step is, what is the solution to this problem? The third step is, do I want to take the course of action necessary to fix this, or do I want to leave it alone? That's steps 1, 2, and 3. That's the principles of those steps too. Does that kind of make sense? So, let's go to the next page. What confirms this? Am I making any friends here? Because you hear people say, I do step 3 every day. Well, then you don't understand what you're talking about. Because really, it's not about step 3. It's not about the steps, and it's not about step 3. It's about the relationship. I'm no longer getting up every morning. Honey, we still married? Or do I get a day off? Do I get a hall pass? No. Anyhow, moving on. Like, that would be a short marriage, right? Yeah. Okay, so 64. They talk about, next we launch on a vigorous course. How was the first step, which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. True or false? True. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step. It is vital and crucial because you thought well before taking it, right? It could have little permanent effect on us at once, followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to cause and conditions. That means it feels good that we made a decision to go to Bahamas or get my car fixed, or whatever the decisions made based on the negotiation of the problem, the solution, or whatever the situation is. Make a decision on it, get my teeth fixed, don't get my teeth. You know, when you make a decision on something, usually you feel good about the decision you come to, yes or no? But if you don't follow up on it, then that decision subsides. We've been talking about going to Europe for the last 4 years. Every time we talk about it, we feel really good about it. We put a bit of money away. We talk about where we're going to go visit and the places. We look at the catalogs. We look at the brochures. We feel good about the whole idea. Close the catalog, put it away, and go back to watching Seinfeld. And that's kind of like the steps, right? We feel good about the idea, but there's a whole bunch more that needs to go into process, right? So they talk about here, our liquor was but a symptom. So then they talk about here why we need to learn a new way of looking at things or processing the things that happen inside of ourselves. We need a new way of looking at things. We need to reprogram the GPS because our GPS isn't working right. Our GPS is riddled with alcoholism, and it finds itself at bars and dealers. Our GPS, our go-to, is add a match to that gasoline. Anybody's GPS work really well here? So it needs to be reprogrammed. It needs a psychic change or spiritual experience. It needs a rearrangement in the way it operates to have a different experience. The first thing that needs to happen is alcoholism needs to be removed from what? The story. If alcoholism is still creating the story, then I'm never going to have a different story. How many people has relapsed here? How many people got dropped off to AA? So, I love her. Okay, so you see, if I didn't have the story of alcoholism, would my life be looking the way it is? So then what's been determining my life is that story of alcoholism. I need a new story. So these people in the fellowship of AA that have a new story, and it's really bright, wild, and really dynamic, is alcoholism determining their story? No. Something else is determining their story. A relationship with something greater than them that's given them a life beyond anything they could ever imagine. They have a new story, the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what we offer here. We have a new story for you if you don't like the story you have. But if you like the story we have, it's not about us convincing you of that. You convince yourself of that. That's where we applaud you when you get here. Oh, look at that one. Oh. They look ready. Dragging a leg. Okay, so they talk about this process here, a business inventory, fact-finding, fact-facing. Then they get into it. If the owner of the business is going to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. Then it talks about we did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly, and people think, oh, I need to be honest before I take stock. No, we took stock honestly. That means when I go into a warehouse and they give me how they do an inventory, they give me their inventory sheet, my job is to walk up and down the aisles and mark down what's on the shelves. And if I come across something, that doesn't belong here, so I don't put it. No, I'm honest about what's on the shelves. Right? So I'm honest about the stock and trade. I'm honest about the things that are happening inside of me.
Good analogy.
Does that kind of make sense? But we're learning how to do this inventory within inside of ourselves. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through the maze of our life. We're going to find out the things that are determining why we feel, think, and react the way we do, the things that are holding us back, that are keeping us grounded. It's like, you can have all the power. And you ever see those outboard motors on a boat? But if it's anchored, if it has like 15 small anchors, and you drop the odd anchor, you may be able to drag the boat, but it's not at its full potential. If you were to get rid of all the anchors, how well will the boat move? So it's what's holding the boat is actually the anchors, and that's the same thing with our lives. So we took stock on it. Let's go find out the flaws in our makeup, the things that are causing us problems today. But in order to do that, we need to take you through a maze that you don't know how to get through. But if you take our lead on it, it may not make sense. By the end of it, you'll have this freedom and happiness that they're talking about. Right? It never asks you, does it make sense? It asks you if you want what we have. And if you want what we have, then just do what we do. It won't make sense now, but it'll make sense later. It's like, I remember in Science Project, they had 2 different colors. And they said, we're going to mix these 2 colors together to make this color. And I thought, sounded like the most stupidest thing ever. And I remember going, how are you going to do that? Doesn't make no sense whatsoever. They put those 2 colors together in a glass and made a different color. I went, holy shit. That was pretty well. Anybody see that? So all they did was put 2 different elements together to make a different experience. And that's what we're doing here. We're putting 2 different elements together, you and this experience, to create something different. There's 2 elements that already exist, just putting them together where they work to create something different. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so we did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. And if you're as sick as me, I say, I don't wear makeup. Okay, but being convinced that self manifested in various ways which had defeated us, we considered its common manifestation. Self is defeating me. I am creating my own demise. That sucks. That my life is exactly the way I've created it. First determined by alcoholism, and then by how I conduct myself, where I spend my thinking and my energy. I create my life. Life is my canvas, and I'm the painter. And it hasn't been paint by numbers for a long time now. So, does that kind of make sense? When it really sucks the idea that we've created our lives exactly the way it's supposed to look based on us. How many people are thrilled with that? So they're saying here we could have a different experience, but you got to find out where it is that's causing it. So they're saying, let's look at some of the first things. Resentment is the number 1 offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stems all forms of spiritual disease. For we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we've been spiritually sick. This is the first time they mention that. A lot of people think, I was spiritually sick, then I became an alcoholic. No, you were an alcoholic, then you became spiritually sick. Because you used alcohol as a form of happy, joyous, and free as a dependence, right? As to solve all my problems, as a go-to. Anybody here? Mm-hmm. And then by the time you realized it wasn't working anymore, that elusive feeling was escaping you, and it was causing you way more pain than happiness, it was too late. Because you realize now what's determined my story is alcoholism. Right? I didn't even create this story. Alcoholism created this story. Right? So then, physically, when the spiritual malady is overcome, what's malady mean? And where's the other time they use that word malady? Of the illness that centers in the mind. Is the second symptom of alcoholism. It's the insanity, not the obsession. On page 23, right? And then they give you an example of what that looks like on page 37 that parallels with our sound thinking, this phantom that happens and it shows up in a drink, right? So, we've been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. In dealing with resentment, we set them on paper. What comes after that? Period. So here's what we do. Everybody got their piece of paper? Take it and fold it in half, lengthways. Fold it in half like this. Fold it in half. Everybody have a piece of paper and a pen? So the purpose. So when you open the page, you open so it kind of doesn't really matter. So you have your pen, you have a piece of paper, it's folded like this. In dealing with resentment, we set them on paper. So this whole process is about getting access to this power that creates the change, because lack of power is my dilemma. So yes, the part of the exercise is the removal of these blocks to what? To get access to this power that's been blocking us from the life force that we already have within inside of ourselves, right? So we have this life force, we all agreed on it. It's that thing that's always questioned you and wanted better for you. We've all have it, otherwise we wouldn't be here. Right, it's that thing inside that kind of lights up when you go to a kid's party, and that thing that goes, oh, when you go around people where there's a fight. You notice you got this energy kind of feel that happens inside. It's that thing when you think about somebody and they phone you 5 minutes later, and they're on the other side of the country. Anybody have that thing? There's something, right? So they're going to say, here, we need you to get better understanding of that. So now the 4 steps actually the beginning of your experience with this power that we're talking about. So the beginning of the 4th step is we start with the 3rd step prayer when you're alone. Do the 3rd step. Do it now privately, right? And then we go to the instruction manual. And the instruction manual here asks us to write down people, places, and things with whom we're pissed off at. Anything that we're resentful at. So my sponsor said, right now, anybody thinking about something they're resentful at. I didn't understand what resentment meant. I thought resentment meant people, places, and things I still had to get even with. I didn't know it didn't. I thought, that's what I thought it meant. I got people to get even with. He says, no, it's the reoccurring thoughts, feelings, and ideas of people gone past that you keep revisiting that has energy attached to it. Or thoughts that keep coming up randomly. Like everybody's have one thought right now of something. How many people has a thought of something that they're resentful at? See how the conscious works? The conscious goes, oh, I'll give you an example of that. And this thing is right there. You can only think one at a time. So I'll put my sister down. Lillian. Oh, then there's Brian. Oh, hey, Brian. Oh, Sam. Oh, yeah, Sam. And then there's Kim. Oh, yeah, Kim. Jeez, I remember what she did. Oh, yeah, fuck. Kim. That's not the purpose of the exercise. I've just gone, the bondage and the hostile takeover is taken over again, right? I'm locked in a memory with an emotional attachment to it. I do the 3rd step prayer to bring me back to the present. I've now created separation for the first time from that resentment. I didn't go through the whole story. Because when I go through the whole story, there's another story ready. Right. Anybody? And the mind starts. Yeah. And it just starts. And it starts and starts. And then the more we think, the more we stop breathing. Anxiety starts to happen. Anybody? We get nausea, and then we start getting, and then the story gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and then we've just created our own depression. Yeah. You acknowledge, hey, no, this is not the purpose of the exercise. Go back to the 3rd step prayer, read what the 3rd step prayer is, remind ourselves what the purpose of the exercise is just make a list, right? And write down whatever comes to mind. So what happens is you'll be thinking about the list more than you're doing the list. Now you get to see how you operate under instructions. You get to see how you and the arguments and whatever you got going on in your head, what you need to learn to do is step back and be an observer how you operate. You're doing an inventory of what's causing you all your problems. What defeats you the most is your thinking and your inability to follow certain instructions. you'll think and struggle with this more than doing it. You'll live your fourth more than writing down names. You'll think, it's just crazy. It's just names on a piece of paper. And it'll take you everything you have to do it. And the more you try to do it, the worse it'll get. But when you stop, do the prayer, I don't know why it works that way. You do the third step prayer. Go, okay, what's your will for me, God, to do the rest of the steps? Okay, I'll do this. And you do it on a piece of paper like this. Do not write it on this other piece of paper. Do not, the piece of paper I got that? Don't write it on there.
Okay.
Write it on another piece of paper. Okay. Why you don't write it on the 4-step inventory sheet? Because you could only put one name at a time in each box. And if you fill up all the boxes, you can't do the next exercise. So you have this one piece of paper over here, put all the names of whatever comes to mind. Even if it's stupid. I don't know why I thought of that. If you thought about it, put it down on the paper, you'll know later. Right? Just try that exercise this week, and next week we'll fill out the rest. But really see the difficulties you have arguing with yourself, what should and shouldn't meet the paper. I've already dealt with that. If you've already dealt with it, then it wouldn't come to mind. Does that kind of make sense? So on a separate piece of paper, next week we're going to have a lot of fun with that list. Awesome. So let's close with the Serenity Prayer.